So I'd like to introduce now our colleague Victoria Slivkoff, who is going to be moderating the Commercialization Partners Perspective, What Makes a Clean Energy Company Attractive panel. And I'm really looking forward to the perspectives of our panelists. So I'd like to invite Victoria up to the stage now. Good morning, how are you?
Good morning. Hi, Tenley. Thanks for having me. Just delighted to be here today on behalf of UC Office of the President.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. And I will let you introduce yourself and then introduce the panelists.
Great. Sounds great. I'm Victoria Slivkoff. I'm the Global Head of Innovation and Entrepreneurship for the UC system. From the headquarters of UC, my role is to build a rich and diverse ecosystem to spur economic development, excuse me, and public benefit. And I do this by developing UC system-wide strategies, infrastructures, resources, including funding and policies and partnerships with our public-private sector and foundation partners so that we can commercialize technologies that can drive. I want to tell you a little bit about UC's innovation and entrepreneurial ecosystem because it's quite vast. Across our 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 national laboratories, I look after our 60 incubators, accelerators, dozens of entrepreneurial programs, 4 California statewide institutes for science and innovation that was launched 20 years ago as a partnership between UC and the private sector and the state of California as a mean to spur economic development. And also UC has a statewide agriculture and natural resources innovation hub. We also have dozens of campus-facing funds that invest in that really rich pipeline. I'm also very just proud of the communities that we've built around people that are just passionate about changing for a better world. And I think this resonates more than ever as we think about how to build back better and to reimagine what a post-pandemic economic future look like and how we can get there through a more purposeful and thoughtful approach to science and innovation. So now I'm going to take a slight pivot to introduce the topic. UC is so pleased to partner on this extraordinary Cal Testbed program to support cutting-edge clean energy entrepreneurs with funded access to 30 world-class facilities across UC's 9 campuses and the Berkeley lab to provide a means for these entrepreneurs to get over a proof of concept and to de-risk their innovations. I really hope that through the success of Cal Testbed, we can see this as a model for other state and regional and national programs to replicate, and not just for commercializing clean technology innovations, but also other key strategic technology areas that are critical to solving global challenges and are key to building our national competitiveness. Yesterday, we had a really great first day hearing about from the entrepreneurs that are going through the program and learning more about their technologies. They're just at the cusp of commercialization. And as we heard from these entrepreneurs, validating their innovations at the testbed facility is really just the beginning of that commercialization journey. What they need and what we really need is a strong national network of these next level partners to really take their innovations to the next level in terms of commercialization. This can be in the form of a pilot project, a demonstration project, direct equity investment, corporate partnerships, acquisitions, or getting another government grant that will help to further their R&D efforts. I am really looking forward to this panel discussion today, which will provide the customer, the investor, and also the government perspectives on this topic. I'm so pleased to have with me 3 experts with deep experience and perspectives. I am joined by Miranda Valentine. She's the CEO of Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. Mariah Lichtenstern. She's the founding partner at Diversecity Ventures, and Connor Prochaska, Chief Commercialization Officer and Director of the Office of Technology Transitions for DOE and the 17 national laboratories. Now, I know we're really eager to dive into the discussion, but before we do, a note on logistics. If you have a question, please type it in the Q&A box, and we'll get to as many as possible. So with that, I'd like to welcome our panelists and invite them to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their role. Miranda, would you like to start us off? And before you start, I'd like to congratulate you on being named very recently as Women of the Year and Champion 2020 by the Women's Council on Energy and Environment. So with that introduction, Miranda, take it away.
Oh, Victoria, that was so nice of you to mention. Thank you. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much to Tenley and Victoria. I'm really looking forward to joining the panel with my colleagues, Mariah and Connor. So I am Miranda Valentine. I'm currently the Chief Executive Officer of an organization called the Renewable Energy Buyers Alliance. We are a trade association made up primarily of large clean energy buyers who are committed to decarbonizing both their energy and the broader energy systems across the country. I come by this work honestly. I've spent most of my career working for large energy consumers. I spent 7 years at Walmart, which is at the time was the largest private energy consumer in the nation, as the director of global renewable energy and sustainable facility strategy. And after that, I spent a few years at the end of the Obama administration as the Assistant Secretary of the Air Force, where part of my role was to lead the Air Force's energy strategy. And the Air Force is actually the largest energy consumer in the Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense is the largest energy consumer in the federal government, who is the largest energy consumer in the nation. So I've been on the energy buyer side for quite some time. And in all of my roles, prior to this one and this one as well, there has been a portion of my focus has been on evolving next generation clean energy technologies that are nearly market ready to help them bridge that commercialization valley of death. So when we get into the panel, that's where my focus will be on those commercialization opportunities and how to get these technologies out of the labs and into real world applications. So I'm really pleased to be here.
Excellent. Thank you, Miranda. Now turning it over to you, Mariah.
Okay, well, gosh, that's a hard one to follow, Miranda. It's amazing. I'm learning so much already. My name is Mariah Lichtenstern, and Victoria, you said that perfectly. I'm so impressed. I am the founding partner of Diversecity Ventures. You did? Yes, you did. Yes, you did. I've added the audio to LinkedIn. There's a hack for that now. But I'm the founding partner of Diversecity Ventures, impact venture capital firm. Our focus is on social, economic, and environmental impact. In that role, I also work with a number of other startup-related organizations. I sit on the board of directors and advisory board for a few of them. I'm also the managing director here in Sacramento, California of the Founder Institute chapter that we launched here in 2017. So of all of the advisory roles that I play, one of my absolute favorites is being on the tech advisory committee for CalSeed, which is one of the New Energy Nexus programs. This is year 3, and I'm super excited about just the public-private partnerships that are coming out of that, and really how that's even led to this discussion, me being part of this discussion here today. So I'm here and excited about participating and also learning and sharing some of the things that that I see from the private sector. So thanks.
Excellent. Thank you, Mariah, and thanks for bringing your expertise to the discussion today. Now turning over to Connor, tell us a bit about your work at the DOE.
Outstanding. Hey, thank you so much, Victoria, and great to be here with Mariah and Miranda. Excited to be here. My name's Connor Prohaska. Can you hear me all right?
Yes.
Okay, just always got to double check. I need to find that LinkedIn hack, by the way, Mariah, because Prohaska is not easy to say either. But it's awesome to be here and chat a little bit about what we're doing here at the Department of Energy, what we do in the Office of Technology Transitions, and my role as the Chief Commercialization Officer for the department. I'll start with, a lot of people don't quite understand always what the Department of Energy does. I'm sure Miranda does, being with her former experience. But the Department of Energy is wildly misnamed. It's really the Department of Nuclear Weapons Security. That's about half of our $40 billion budget. And the other half is research, science, and technology. We are the largest basic science tech complex in the world. We run the 17 national labs that you've heard of, from Berkeley National Lab out in California to Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee to Pacific Northwest and across the country. We spend about $20 billion a year on research and technology at the Department of Energy. And that ranges from understanding neutrinos and the Big Bang and what happened in the time right after it, to the newest and greatest efficiency technologies and renewable energy technologies. So it's quite a lot of different technologies that exist. And for a long time, the department kind of had a laissez-faire attitude towards what we would do with that basic science and technology after it was created. I called it the artillery effect. We'd launch it out and hope that somebody would read that publication and hope that somebody would grab that technology and go make an impact with it. I was appointed as the first chief commercialization officer under Secretary Perry to go and do what we could to make an impact with that technology in any way we could. That is engaging in customer bases. Right now, we're actually in the middle of working out on an engagement with REBA to make sure that all their members understand what we're doing. We have a long-standing relationship with the California Clean Energy Commission, with states, with local governments, with places across the country, to make sure that we're building as many inroads as possible so that people can come and access that $20 billion worth of research that the Department of Energy does. An additional thing that we do in the Office of Technology Transitions is we have engaged in the ecosystem itself. And a big part of that is making sure that, as I like to say, if we're the pitcher, we want to make sure there's somebody behind home plate to catch this technology. We're putting out a lot of great stuff, but we need an ecosystem that's there to absorb it. And so there's a few programs I'll talk about today, and a lot of this is going to be a pitch because my number one job is to make sure that you and the audience are aware of the opportunities that exist out there. And we want to make sure it's as accessible as possible. We have smart policies in place to make it to where they're not prohibitive for you. And above all, to go out and promote it, because I think a lot of what I just said about what we're doing at the Department of Energy, most people don't quite understand or know exists. And we are the number one supporter of basic science and research in the country and the world. And we want to make sure that we maintain that position. And as I said earlier, that we are getting the greatest impact for the U.S. taxpayers' dollar as possible. So one thing I will tell you right now is the EPIC program, which we just launched, which is the Energy Programs and Innovation. That is a $5 million program that's meant specifically to invigorate the ecosystem that exists out there. And we'll talk more about that later. And I don't want to get into all the pitches I'll throw today, but excited to be here, excited to talk about all the challenges and opportunities that exist in this space. And very just happy to be here. And thank you for the invitation.
Great. Thank you, Connor. Prohaska. Now I know and I'll remember. It's quite the portfolio that oversees. So I hope that we'll be able to tease that out through the conversation. So I want to dive into the first question with advice to entrepreneurs. How should they position themselves to attract investment and strategic partnerships? Particularly, what proof points do you look for? And this is particularly tricky because the lead time to bring these innovations online can just be so long, and the capital investments that are needed. So how should these entrepreneurs maintain momentum and position themselves for better pathways to attract public-private sectors such as yourselves for partnerships? Who would like to start?
I'll start if I could, because I think what you're going to hear from Mariah and Miranda feeds off of where we start, because we're so early. Right. When the Department of Energy does some technology, by the time it looks feasible is about the time we're dropping off. And that's also what we try to do as the Office of Technology Transitions, is find those partners that exist. A great example that Miranda would find very interesting is we recently signed an MOU with the Department of Energy and Army Futures Command to make that pathway between those two organizations a little more applicable. One of the tough things about my job as the Chief Commercialization Officer is the Army, the Department of Defense does research to protect sailors, soldiers, airmen, and Marines win wars. NASA does research to put somebody at Mars. The Department of Energy does research because it needs to be done. Somebody needs to do it. It's basic research. So building that first step is always important, but this is a hard area. And I think making sure that at the onset, regulators, policymakers, from where we sit, understand that this is not a one shot out of the barrel and it's going to instantly, it's not an app, right? It doesn't just happen. That is very important to set the battle space, if you will, that this is a long haul. Consistency is key, and maintaining the consistent effort of building inroads and making sure that we at the department have smart policies that don't make it prohibitive, like IP rules and laws, which you can chip away with, and making sure that people's expectations are set from the very beginning, that your angel investor knows that this is not something that they can just pull out of in 3 or 5 years, that it's a longer haul than that. So I'll leave it there and pass it off.
On to you, Miranda.
I was just thinking that this, Tenley did a brilliant job, and you did a brilliant job, Victoria, pulling together this panel, because really what do these technologies and companies need as they're coming out of the laboratory system, whether it's the DOE laboratory system or the university laboratory system or just a venture laboratory system? They really need patient money, and they need, as Connor says, the customer there to catch the technology and be willing to try it. So there are multiple things, and Connor touched on a couple of these. First, make sure that you're thinking about the use case of your technology from the customer perspective right from the beginning. And to the extent that you can actually join conversations like this one, or like conversations that we are instituting at REBA with DOE and on our own, to bring the customer voice to clean energy innovators and entrepreneurs. If you're earlier stage, really start thinking early about what do my customers need, ask them what they need. Then as you become ready to launch, as you become ready to commercialize, what's really important is to be tested not just in a laboratory, but in what I call the living laboratory, so in real world facilities. And that's really the program that REBA is trying to institute across our membership. So we have members that are data center companies, that are retailers, that are manufacturers, that are chemical companies. And what we're really looking to do is create a more integrated and coordinated network of living laboratories that we can test these technologies in real world situations. And I'll just give you one example. Many years ago when I was at Walmart, we were looking at hydrogen fuel cell forklifts, which had been proven in the laboratory to be very efficient, very effective, and very user-friendly. But in our distribution centers, we had some really unusual real-world environments. We had special cases that would prevent bananas from ripening too quickly, for example. That's not an environment you're typically going to find in a DOE laboratory. Now, more and more, the labs are able to replicate and simulate those real-world environments. But the end customers, the Walmarts of the world and the GMs of the world and the Googles of the world, they want to see these technologies actually put to use, put to pilot in the field. And that's what gives them the confidence that it's going to perform in the field and their facilities at or better how it's performing in the laboratory. And then the second component that's really critical is ensuring that you have manufacturing and business scalability. So many big companies, the volume that they can procure is such that many entrepreneurs need help bridging that gap of building one or two for a pilot situation and actually being able to build hundreds or thousands or hundreds of thousands to meet the scale and need of the large customers who are willing to take a little bit more of a risk on these technologies. So I'll stop there and hand it to Mariah.
Those are all good advice. Mariah, as a seasoned entrepreneur and a seasoned investor, your views.
You know, first of all, that was an excellent foundation, and the key point that both Miranda and Connor hit on is, you know, the validation of the customer, having the customer in mind from the beginning. And so, I know we're going to talk about some other things in the conversation, but I just want to give a little bit of context of the mindset of the private sector and venture capital in particular. So as Miranda was talking about moving from the lab validation and the pilot programs into being able to scale, that's really where venture capital wants to come in, right? When you have that demand, you validated the technology, that's the de-risking that we want to see, because even though, we take risks as venture capitalists, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our investors, our limited partners, to make sure that the companies that we're investing in have the capability to potentially return a multiple on the fund, right? And so even if every single company you're investing in has that potential, there's a high percentage of them that are going to fail, and that is the risk that we take. So when we're actually looking at them to be as de-risked as possible, and that's kind of a hard thing for a lot of entrepreneurs to understand and swallow, because they see us as these high risk takers, right? And so the point that we really want to come in is that rocket fuel, where you've identified and validated the customer and technology, and you know what your channels are, or at least you have some assumptions that can be validated with the earlier stage capital, and then follow-on capital will really be that fuel, or at least moonshot, right? And we see what happens with rocket launches, right? They're not always successful, but that's really the role of venture capital, is to come in when things are being de-risked. Now, one of the things that I see, first of all, full disclosure, in the space that I'm in, amongst my colleagues, even amongst limited partners, there has been a stereotype that clean energy, ESG-oriented technologies are not suitable for venture capital. And there's been a lot of passing the buck to the public sector to fund these things. And the reason why is because the long R&D cycle, right? And so, part of the thought leadership that I've been working on as being part of CalSeed and working with New Energy Nexus is to, point to how the public sector has put in work, much the same way that technologies were de-risked during World War II, when we were creating a Silicon Valley out of the orchards that were there before. It was nothing there before, until a crisis, which was World War II, prompted the US government to de-risk a lot of these technologies that aided in the war effort, right? And so right now we're in an environmental crisis, where we really need to focus on addressing these existential issues, right? These existential problems. And that's what the public sector and these programs that we're talking about and celebrating here today are doing. Once they've gone through these processes, it's an imperative that the private market and venture capitalists look at these investments. Now, I'll give an example. I went to grad school for motion picture producing, and the films that make the most money are family-oriented films, but the films that get made the most are R-rated films. This is something I said to a very high-level LP, push back against clean technology being viable for venture capital. Why is it that the R-rated movies get made instead of the family films? It's because that's what the people who make the decisions want to invest in, and they're going to make money regardless. And so we really need more imperatives, more accountability, more policy, and I know we're going to discuss this later, that pushes the private sector, right, to make these investments, because they're important. They may not be the hip, cool, fun, picture app, but it's what the world needs. And it's also very smart investment, because there's no larger market than the global citizenship that is impacted by climate change, right? And so with that said, I will just say that moving from public funding to private sector funding, what founders really need to keep in mind is that you're dealing with a different audience that you've been dealing with in the public sector, and with research. You have to move to attention span, people who are inundated with requests. They're only human. They have 24 hours in a day, and you need to give them picture book version of content until they opt in to give you more attention and more focus to do that deeper dive on your technology. And so it's really about simplifying and putting things into a format and understanding the culture, moving from public funding to the
Can
private
I add
sector.
one thing to something that both Mariah and Miranda said, because it sounds daunting to a lot of innovation and inventors and technologists, is this end state of where it's going to be used. What's the use case? One thing that we talked about in my previous position when I was at ARPA-E, the Advanced Research Projects Agency for the Department of Energy, was right now, as you sit doing your work at your bench, what could it be used for? Your answer does not have to be right, and probably won't be right. But if you're consistently thinking about that, I guarantee you when the actual use case ends up at the end of the process or the midpoint of the process, it'll be much less daunting. The first sentence of writing a novel is much harder than the midway sentence. If you're thinking about it and always evolving that, it's not as daunting as you think it is.
Yeah, that's a really great point. So let us talk about policy, because I think clean tech is one of those industries where policy and regulation really moves the needle in terms of spurring investment and development. So let's think about policy, particularly at the earliest, the riskiest stage. What are some of the good examples to share in thinking about what types of policies should be prioritized, such as, is it research and development? Are we talking about workforce development in terms of the new clean tech economy? Entrepreneurship or building capacity, such as through programs like Cal Testbed to help entrepreneurs have the runway and the support mechanisms to validate their technologies.
Yeah, I would just say for all of that, yes. I think one is consistency, as I mentioned. My office is a great example. Really, the statutory role that I exist in is called the Tech Transfer Coordinator for the department. That was created under the Energy Policy Act way back in 2005. And there's been a series of people that have been tagged that from every administration. At the end of the Obama administration, they created the Office of Technology Transitions, which was a small 4-person shop that was supposed to purposely focus on it. This administration has grown that office significantly. We've grown now to about 30 people. Our budget has gone much higher because Congress has consistently seen this. So it's been a slow burn of realizing this is something that in particular the Department of Energy needs to be focused on. And I would hope that that is consistent as it goes forward. So I think that's very important is consistency. And I don't see any reason based on the fact that this is a very bipartisan office and effort that would change. I would also say when it comes to what type of dollars needs to be spent, there's been much more of an appetite from Congress, once again, at a bipartisan level, to move beyond just the basic research and development, but really to deployment and demonstration type dollars, because that's really not what the department traditionally gets funded for. And we're trying some new and different things, particularly at ARPA-E, through some new projects and programs to go into that area, because that is, like I keep saying, the valley of death before the valley of death is that first one. And more applied research, such as at the Department of Defense, is more has a better appetite for that. But the department, once again, our mission is basic science, and we really come up to what is a deployment, what is a demonstration, what do our funders, which are up in Congress, what do they have an appetite for? And so I think that demonstration and deployment is the next step that needs to be explored in a responsible way.
And Miranda, thinking about, really excited to wait for the incoming administration and to really take a look at the policies that are going to be in place to support environmental justice and a transition to the clean energy economy. Help us look around that corner.
So, I would say that from the perspective of clean energy buyers, there are a number of policies that are going to be really important to have to support the demand side, really driving the zero carbon energy system. And those are not all necessarily related to technology, so I won't spend a lot of time on things like expanding organized markets and working on harmonizing greenhouse gas data tracking so that you have better time matched greenhouse gas data that goes with each electron to the load that it's serving. There's a lot of things like that that aren't necessarily related to the technology question. From a technology perspective, I would agree with Connor that what we really need to see is continuing the trend of increasing funding for the department for clean technology, both early research and the deployment phase, the commercialization phase. You know, the federal government only spends maybe 9 billion, Connor, you're going to know better than me, annually on energy innovation. I mean, that's the amount that my Air Force energy budget was, $9 billion. And we're only spending that amount on energy innovation to solve what I agree with Mariah is the existential challenge of our time. We really need to be increasing that number dramatically, doubling and even more the amount that we're investing in clean energy innovation, and focusing on that commercialization phase is critical. I work very closely with a number of the labs, and it is frustrating to many, including many in the labs, to see great work that never leaves the bench, that has so much promise to solve some of these big challenges in the world, whether it's decarbonizing the energy system, looking at fully integrated energy systems that can integrate today's utility scale technologies that are zero carbon, like hydropower and nuclear power, with tomorrow's clean energy, zero carbon technologies, like storage on the variable and intermittent technologies. So those integrated labs are really, really critical, ensuring that they're funded and expanded so that we're really identifying the solutions to the integration of all the different technologies that are going to be required, all the way through to looking at a range of other non-decarbonization challenges like energy resilience, energy security, and those kinds of things. So really doubling down on the growth of the last several years and increasing that growth would be critical.
And obviously, Mariah, from an investor perspective, I'm sure you have your eyes kept on focusing on, you know, what are policies that are coming forward. So your thoughts on this?
So there's a couple of things in terms of policy, and I'll say this: I devoted the first quarter of 2020 to a fellowship. I'm an Aspen Tech Policy Hub fellow. I'm really trying to demystify and be a better bridge between, you know, policy and the private sector. The lack of understanding we so desperately need to transitioning into clean technology. So I would say just on the, you know, prioritization. Technology is the purpose of technology is to simplify and empower us to deal with complex issues, right? But for some reason, we tend to think that we can't walk and chew gum. I'll give an example. In Silicon Valley, the diversity issue is one that's complex and longstanding, and is you know, tied to many different things. But you know, there's this stereotype that in Silicon Valley, diversity means white women or white and Asian women, right? Because that's what's been prioritized, because more people can wrap their head around that than you know, addressing you know, Black, Latinx, and other underrepresented founders. It's almost a similar concept here, right? Like, we don't have to just focus on one thing. In terms of just timeline, it makes sense to prioritize the R&D, right? Because there's going to be a long, it's going to be a long process to validate technologies. And so it's great that we've done so much of that work, but you know, to the point that has been made earlier, and especially what Connor had mentioned about, you know, it used to be like this laissez-faire approach to like, okay, we're gonna you know, do this research, and we're gonna put it out there, and we're gonna hope someone discovers it and opts in. And really, when you look at even the movement that's taken place in Silicon Valley over the past 5, 6, 7 years around the lean launch methodology and getting outside the building and having the customer in mind, you saw very much a similar thing in technology, where you know, technologists would build these things and nobody wanted them, right? And so, you know, I think that like seeing the intelligence goes into creating these products and coupling that with the business mindset, or bringing on people that are in the technology sector who understand how to take, you know, this technology, these technologies that are being developed to market, is part of that process. And developing the workforce, and these things can be done. They don't have to be done, you know, one before the other. But we do need to put them in the right places. So I think it's a matter of identifying who's going to do what and how. And some of that may be, creating new programs. So, and these are perfect examples, what we're here discussing today and what we're seeing today. The other side of policy is, the barriers that exist and the bottlenecks that exist on getting funding to these important things. And this is true in diversity, and it's also true in clean technology. And again, with people just not feeling like, well, yep, that needs to be invested in, but I don't want to do it. And since I don't want to do it, I don't have to do it. And so a lot of the funding that comes into venture capital is from public sources. For example, pension funds, public pensions, public universities, right? And they really, I've heard discussions with, representatives of limited partners who say, we talk about these things and the board has brought it up, but there's not action being taken. And so like we see now with the pandemic and, the Black Lives Matter movement, we've seen a little bit of movement, a little bit of accountability, but there's retrenchment going back to the same old, right? And so, when it comes to clean technology, I see a lot of analogies here where we really need to say, hey, if this money that you are managing is coming from the citizens who are impacted by climate change, you need to set aside a tranche of fund or tranches of funding specifically to addressing these issues, or else. and I think one thing that limited partners can do is incentivize managers like myself, right? It doesn't always have to be, sticks. There can also be carrots, right? And saying like, here's the benefit, here's the incentive, or we are going to prioritize investments into you, or we are going to weight our decision making if you are investing in these things. But here's what you need to do to de-risk. Right. And so I think like those are some policy things. And then another thing that I'm kind of ambitious about is, and this is something that I did a little bit of research and writing around and have worked with others around, is, looking at a social wealth fund, right? Because we do a lot of these grants into companies. And I know that there's like policies and regulations and laws around what we can actually invest in. But, if we're right now, like there's a critique that in Congress around pharmaceuticals, where we have a lot of grants going into developing pharmaceuticals, and it's de-risking are coming in, and then they're making huge profits, and none of it is actually going back to people. And then people, and by people I mean the people, citizens, and citizens are paying exorbitant prices for prescriptions, right? And so what are the people getting out of these investments? The theory is that we're getting some general benefit of the technology existing in the world. But I really believe we need to go a step further and look at some of the best examples of sovereign wealth funds and develop a social wealth fund. And it can be done such that, when we're in situations like we are now with the pandemic, where trillions of dollars has gone out to relief. If we have something that's actually generating revenue, that's getting a return, even if it's a small percent, 1% is better than nothing. Putting $1 million into a company and getting 1% is better than getting nothing as a return. When you look at the trillions of dollars that leading technologies are generating, the United States should be getting a piece of that. States should be getting a piece of that and giving it back into the people. And so, we don't have to go and tax people every time we need to raise money. Like, we should be investing in our mutual assets. And so I think we need to get innovative and look at some policy approaches. And that's just one potential example.
Yeah, great points. I think I really want to tease out what you said about diversity, equity, inclusion, and what are some of those considerations? Because the unintended consequence of this booming tech economy is that we have increased inequalities, right? And look at how the pandemic has exacerbated inequality as well. So what are your observations? And Mariah, thanks for getting us started there. And how can we truly democratize opportunities via innovation, from who we invest in to where we invest to how we invest? For example, think about the unequal impact of pollution and how we can increase more equitable access to opportunities, thinking about who can be participants of this new job, right? The future of work. And then so that we can create better public health as well. So how are these components being addressed, and what are your thoughts? Miranda, should I jump to you first?
Yeah, sure. I think this is such a critical topic, and I'm glad that we're discussing it in this conversation today. So we know that the clean energy industry is really challenged from a diversity perspective, even more so than the general workforce. So starting by just looking at our own companies and really taking on the systemic challenges that have prevented people of color, and particularly African Americans, and I think Mariah really hit the nail on the head, that we're at a point in this country where we oughtn't just be looking at people of color, because in the clean energy industry, actually, there are subsegments of people of color that are very well represented, and the industry looks more similar to the national population. But the clean energy industry really does lag behind the national population and the national workforce, particularly with Black Americans and with women across the board, much more so. And interestingly, in subsegments of the clean energy industry, the wage gap, both for females and for people of color in the clean energy industry, is greater than the wage gap in the general workforce. And even more interestingly, that wage gap seems to grow as women age. So middle-aged women with spouses and children in the solar industry only make about 58 cents to the dollar of men that are also of their same age with spouses and children, whereas younger generations, the wage gap is about, I think, 78 cents. So it's really, really interesting to look at just our industry. And then to go one step deeper, which is really where Mariah was taking us, to look at the actual projects and how wealth is built in the clean energy industry. And the clean energy industry is a wealth building industry. It is a booming industry, and a lot of wealth is being built in this industry. These are good paying jobs, and the leadership of these companies are good paying jobs as well. And yet that wealth is being disproportionately not going to marginalized communities. And then even one click deeper, looking at climate justice and energy justice and where these projects are being built, who's benefiting from clean, low marginal cost wind and solar. It's not typically low income and underserved communities. So how can we ensure that it's not just the already privileged members of our community that are now getting more privileged by clean, low cost energy, and we're sort of sticking the dirty, high marginal cost energy to the lower income and more marginalized communities. So these are topics that I'm really thrilled that the clean energy industry, I feel certainly this year, the lens has grown even more given the national focus on this issue. And it has been a topic that the industry has been looking at for a number of years, but it really has become one of the biggest fires burning closest to us in the industry. And I think there's real opportunity for us to work together as we get honest about what the industry looks like and who the industry is benefiting today.
Yeah, well said, Miranda. And Connor, from where you sit at the DOE, are you guys thinking about DEI, and what are some of the ways that we can get, close the gap that Miranda talked about? Sure.
So as with everything, we're at the ground level, right? And so the lens that we look at it as is, where are we funding this research to start? The joke that I was told by our public affairs office, I'm not allowed to say anymore, but I'm gonna do it anyway, is diversity is not funding MIT, Harvard, and Stanford. That's not diversity. And maybe I'll never become an adjunct professor at any of those now, but regardless, the point being is that when we talk about the funding going out from the Department of Energy, it takes a lot. It's a complex method of getting these grants, getting these funding opportunities, getting in on the ground floor of this basic research. And there's giant entities out there and giant university systems, University of California, my alma mater of Texas A&M, that have whole buildings that are dedicated to looking for funding from the federal government to do their research. Well, guess who doesn't? A lot of the smaller universities, in particular HBCUs. And one of the things that my office has recently created, and I hope everybody goes to the Office of Technology Transitions website and looks up the University Toolkit. And the University Toolkit is exactly what it sounds like. It is a pamphlet of, hey, here's the websites you go to, here's how you do it, doing anything we can do to make it more accessible from the funding aspect, to work with universities that traditionally have not been giant research behemoths out there in what they do. And so that's one huge part of what we do. The second big part of what the Department of Energy is very in tune with and very interested in, we have our program through our diversity office, Economic Impact and Diversity Office, called Equity and Energy, which OTT is one of the champions of that project and program. But we've also engaged through an MOU with the Minority Business Development Agency of the federal government to utilize their community-based offices and satellite offices across the country to really get there to where we can make sure that we're paying attention at the local level. Additionally, we encourage people to utilize opportunity zones. Opportunity zones are great, but if we don't look at stuff, particularly with the clean energy aspect and the industries that are growing in the technical world and the research world, frankly, opportunity zones are just going to be a bunch of places where hotels are built, because it's a great tax incentive to do that. And so getting non-traditional ways of funding into those areas and showing people that this is how it can be done, putting it out there as a model, is very important. Investors often like to think that they're very new age, or not new age, but very risk-taking and want to do the newest and greatest thing. A lot of it's just making sure that they did something that's not going to get them in trouble. It may be a cool idea, but they're not going to invest in a new model. And that's coming from somebody who used to be in that industry. If the model's not written on paper in front of them, it's important. And so I think that's something, and I really appreciated Mariah's comments on the funding mechanism and vehicle, because I think that's important too. This topic could probably, the whole panel could go on for hours because everybody's got great points that I think are very, very important. But those are some of the ways that we've really looked to make sure that where we sit at the department, where's that funding going? How do we make sure that there's fair and equitable access to that funding? And then additionally, STEM cannot be understated. It's not just something that we think is important for the social aspect of it, but it's a national security imperative that the entire population of the United States be equally and fervently represented, to make sure that the United States stays on the forefront of clean energy, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, whatever it is. Because if we're not at the forefront, some of our adversaries around the world may be at the forefront, and they may not share the same values that we do. So we take that very seriously, and want to make sure that we continue to pay attention to that.
Thanks, Connor. And Mariah, your fund is called Diversecity Ventures, right? So I'd love to hear your perspective.
Well, since you mentioned that, there's really a double or triple even entendre in the name Diversecity Ventures. And oftentimes I walk in a room, people see a Black woman and they make an assumption that you only invest in, people of color and women. And really, that's not how I define diversity. I define diversity like Oxford or Webster's. It means variance, right? It means difference, right? And we like to say we're capitalizing on diverse perspectives. And so, double clicking in on the DEI point, there may be, most of the teams that I see are not of color. I see probably more teams of color or that are diverse than many others may see. And I'm more in tuned and tapped in by virtue of my network and affiliations. But, many that I see aren't tapped in, and part of the value add they see in working with me is being able to access incredible talent that exists, but that are just not connected, right? And so, if you have an existing team that wants to capitalize on diverse perspectives, it doesn't be the co-founders, it can be the founding team that they're recruiting in that have operating experience in other sectors or within the same sector. It can be your advisory board and your board of directors. There's many ways to infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so when I throw in, this equity point, in that, that also means getting people on cap tables equitably, right? Because this is part of what's causing the gap in the risk capacity of communities of color that have systematically been denied opportunities since the inception of this country. I'll do a shameless plug here, and I've actually compiled a number of resources that I hope I can slide into the chat. But when going back to being an Aspen Tech Policy Hub Fellow, the project that I worked on during my time there and that I continue to work on is around closing the tech funding gap. And one aspect of that is the opportunity pledge, where we're really working to engage venture capitalists, limited partners in, looking at some of their heuristics and some of the systemic biases that exist, whether they're implicit or explicit, and challenging them to look at their policies or execution in ways that they can help to close the funding gap and mitigate these challenges that exist. That said, it's not only about, what we've heard ad nauseum in technology and in venture capital is that it's a pipeline issue. It's a pipeline issue. No, it's not a pipeline issue. There was a study that came out, that was kind of trying to justify the status quo that said, well, when you look at the number of people that are taking APCS, you're just not seeing it in Black and Brown. You're not seeing Black and Brown students or Black and schools that have a high representation of Black and Brown populations taking the APCS. Well, is the school offering APCS? Number one, I'm from Oakland, California, which is in the heart of Silicon Valley. And I remember just a few years ago, teachers standing up and saying, hey, we're a STEM school and we don't have a computer lab. I went to Oakland High for that long and they didn't have a computer lab. They didn't have basic resources for the class. And I actually commuted to Hayward to get AP classes. So there actually is a wealth of talent. But there is underdevelopment and underserving of that talent. There are hidden figures that are out there that are high performing, and they're just not being tapped. So if you wanted to get the best athlete, if you wanted to get the best executive on your board, what are you going to do? If you want to get the best CEO, you are going to go and look in the crooks and crannies. You're going to go and find them. And, we need to see a greater attention to recruitment. And so, HBCUs are a great example because they've been undertapped, but 90% of don't go to HBCUs. So you have to indeed include HBCUs, but where are the Black students that are in engineering? And, look at the NSBE, look at the Anita Borg, look at, all of these other organizations that are affinity pools, but also go beyond. And I'll just share that Kauffman Fellows did some research that found that the companies that are founded and have an executive suite of diverse founders and executives outperform on realized exits their more homogenous counterparts. So the data is out there that it makes dollars and cents to do it, but there's not enough of an imperative. So, another thing, just like with the people that are already out there, tapping them in, getting them on boards, helping founders who may not be diverse as we define it, tap into other networks that they've just not been exposed to because we live in a country of de facto segregation. So these are just a few things. And also I think one other thing that I'll just throw in there is that we need to get behind this constraint. Like here in California, we had Prop 209 passed in 1996. And that basically said that that the state cannot discriminate against or grant preferential treatment on the basis of race, sex, color, ethnicity. Proposition 16, which was meant to repeal that, or attempted to repeal that, was defeated recently on the most recent ballot. And so, there's this idea that here in California, and to a certain extent across the nation, that, you have to discriminate or give preferential treatment to incorporate diversity. But I think the important thing to remember is, number one, collecting data and being accountable and doing a Rooney Rule of sorts of, making sure that you're including people is not discriminating. It's not giving preferential treatment. But we also need to acknowledge that the fact that there has been preferential treatment given to certain people. And because of that, we have all suffered in the long term. And we're seeing that increasingly. McKinsey Company has come out and
Can you hear us okay, Mariah?
oh no, it's okay. Sorry, I cut out for a second. McKinsey Company came out analyzing. Yes, I can hear you. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I think there was a lag. Something happened there. McKinsey and Company came out with a study about the economic impact of the racial wealth gap and found that closing the racial wealth gap will increase the GDP 5 to 7% and put over $1 trillion into our economy within 10 years. There's also a study that came out that showed that over 9 million jobs and over 300 billion in annual net income is being lost due to discriminatory practices that benefit one small group over others, right? And so that impacts all of us. And this is the divide and conquer that's taken place since the days of the giddy multitude and slave coats to divide us. And so really, being inclusive, having a DEIJ and throwing justice in their mindset is something that's going to benefit all Americans. It's going to help us get back to the kind of economy that we need to see, especially post-pandemic. And so it really is a moral, economic, and urgent imperative that we take a proactive and creative and innovative mindset in how to incorporate DEI into all of our
Mariah,
initiatives.
you've taken us home. These are some really, really great thoughts. I really believe in the power of thought leadership to seed ideas, and I believe that you've all done that today. So Miranda Valentine, Mariah Lichtenstern, and Connor Prohaska, I want to thank you for a stimulating conversation today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and I want to thank you all so much for joining us today. Your leadership and the work in this field is so important. I'm really fortunate to have come across in my past. I worked with the U.S. Department of Energy supporting their RDD&D, the programs with the Office of Electricity, for almost 10 years. And then I was also the director of the Solar Ready Vets program, which is a clean energy workforce development initiative. And then also worked on the Clean Energy Education and Empowerment program for women in clean energy. So I'm really delighted that so many times my career path has overlapped with Miranda Valentine's and with all of the excellent professionals at the U.S. Department of Energy. And I'm really delighted to see the DOE's focus on commercializing some of these brilliant research programs and innovations that are coming out of the national labs. Because for decades, I ran peer reviews for a decade, I ran peer reviews for some of the most brilliant innovations and research and development. And really when I saw it getting deployed was during the Recovery Act, when I worked on the smart grid investment grants, and we deployed $3.4 billion worth of smart grid technologies across 99 projects across the country. So that was really exciting. And I hope we can see something similar where we really do a tremendous effort in supporting clean energy and clean energy research and deployment across the country so that it benefits everyone, because it really can be the rising tide that lifts all boats, providing job opportunities to people, workforce development, enriching communities, and creating better public health, creating lots of economic benefits across the country. And so we have an opportunity to even use the clean energy transition as a lever for empowerment and a lever for communities to rise. So with that, I'm just so delighted with that panel. Thank you very, very much, everybody, for participating. With that, I'd like to bring on the UC.